Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is a job guide for Final Fantasy XIV. Several years back I created a starter guide for the game, which you can find a link to in the description, wherein I gave an overview of the classes and jobs as part of my beginner's overlook to the game. Several years later, and some of the classes have changed significantly. Some entirely new jobs have been added to the game, so I thought it would be prudent to give an updated overview of them. You can find timecodes on screen and in the description if you want to jump to a specific class. And if you want a more in-depth look at the tanks, for example, I have a video guide dedicated to tanking in 14. I'll be ranking each job based on how easy they are, how strong they are, and how well designed or not I think they are. Of course, this is all largely my opinion, backed up where I can with various statistics where possible. For example, I might consider a job hard when you consider it easy, which is subjective, but the statistics of each job's DPS is a more objective measuring stick. Likewise, keep in mind that if I rate a job 5 out of 5 on the difficulty scale, that doesn't necessarily mean it's incredibly hard, it just means it's the hardest a job's like to get within this game. I hope that makes sense. This video is being made in summer 2020, so it will of course be outdated in time. If you're looking for information on the Judge, Beast Tamer, or some other job that doesn't currently exist, sorry. Next time. Finally, just as a disclaimer, Square Enix have provided me with game time codes for Final Fantasy XIV, but otherwise I am neither receiving sponsorships, nor monetary compensation, or anything like that. That said, let's get started. We'll start with one of the new jobs added in Shadowbringers. Gunbreaker is job only. In Final Fantasy XIV we have jobs and classes. When you create your character you will choose a class, such as Gladiator, and upon mastering this class at level 30 you will evolve it into a job, which you could think of as an advanced class. Where Gladiator is the class, Paladin is the job. Gunbreaker, however, is job only and has no corresponding class. It is a tank that starts at level 60 and currently puts out the most DPS of all the tanks, at the cost of having slightly weaker mitigations. The basic gameplay rotation of a Gunbreaker involves generating special ammo via your normal combo and then using these charged ammos to unleash powerful attacks, including a unique continuation combo, wherein you effectively follow up each hit of your combo with another attack immediately. Whilst Gunbreaker's DPS rotation is marginally more complex than other tanks, I do not consider it a very hard job to play. That said, I do think it's the hardest tank. Most of the difficulty with Gunbreaker would come from properly managing Super Belied, which puts you at 1 hit point, landing your Heart of Stone on other party members, and keeping your rotation going optimally. Gunbreakers bring the highest damage of all tanks, and can still main tank just fine, which in my opinion makes them the best overall tank for a lot of situations. As for the design, personally I feel the job feels very well put together. My only issues with it are some of the sound effects, which lack the proper punch you would expect, despite being changed from their launch state. And finally, to play Gunbreaker you need to have reached level 60 and have bought Shadowbringers. At level 30, archers will unlock Bard, a job that I'll admit I've not put very much time into. I personally find their design lacking and not as cohesive as I would like. Even though I enjoy the class fantasy of Archer, I just plain don't understand the logic of, you like using bows. That is basically the same thing as an instrument and singing songs. Here's a harp. But if you're looking at damage, well, Bard is one of the lowest damage dealers in the game at the moment. Probably what I would consider the worst job currently in Final Fantasy XIV. Your rotation as a Bard will involve various ballads or songs that enhance or work alongside your archery skills. The problem is, there's just such a disconnect between the various abilities that for me, Bard feels like playing 2 different jobs at the same time. Needlessly complex, convoluted, for extremely lackluster results. You're doing a lot and getting not much out of it. It is an easy job to play badly, and a hard job to play well. And even played well, your damage will be very low, as mentioned. In my opinion, it is a job in dire need of a complete overhaul. Give us a proper support Bard, and then also a Ranger as a new job who focuses on true archery, perhaps. The only reason I give Bard a 2 out of 5 instead of a 1 for design is the fact that Bards alone have performance mode, wherein you are allowed to play instruments to delight or annoy other players. It is a relatively useless feature, but a fun one, and unique to Bard, and I must admit the sole reason I unlocked them. Also, you might be wondering how it's fair for me to rank jobs I haven't reached the maximum level with. That's a fair point. For these few jobs, I referred to other players of similar skill as to mine own, making sure we were of similar mindset. In example, if we both thought one job was X out of 5 for difficulty, then I could reasonably assume another job would be similar. My favourite job in Final Fantasy. I love spears and I love the aesthetic of the Dragoon, the Dragon Knight, but unfortunately it is a hard one to suggest. It starts at Lancer and becomes a Dragoon at level 30. Of course, don't let my ratings put you off Dragoon or any class. Let me explain why I rank it this way. In terms of difficulty, Dragoon has to put up with almost every bad or otherwise hard or inconvenient gameplay mechanic in 14. You need to manage positionals, which are frustrating because tanks can sometimes spin things around. You need to keep a meter going at all time or suffer a huge DPS loss, whilst also dealing with poorly implemented jumps that lock you in place. For some baffling reason, Dragoons are unable to use their jumps to avoid damage. You know, how it works in every other game they've appeared in. Instead, jumps are merely animations. For all intents and purposes, even when you are jumping, the game considers them still in that original position. One good thing, as of Shadowbringers, high-level Dragoons have much faster jumps now, and they are in a much better place than they were in Stormblood, so the problem is reduced, but still present. Ignoring all of that, the Dragoon ranks 7 of 10 in DPS. Your gameplay as a Dragoon will involve keeping your Blood of the Dragon meter up, but there are times when you are forced to lose it, and there's nothing you can do about that. Unlike the samurai's meditation or the monk's anatman, for example, you have no way to keep your meter going, which is a strange decision. Why Dragoons don't have an ability like Song of the Dragon they can channel to keep their meter going, I do not know. In general, I would suggest that the Dragoon is much in need of a rework. Not as dire a rework as, say, the Bard needs, but a rethinking of their meters, as it feels underwhelming in its current state, even if a lot of the individual abilities are interesting and fun to use. In an ideal world, a Dragoon should be a sort of off-tank DPS that doesn't bring much utility to the party, but is able to avoid certain attacks by using their jumps. Whilst you might think that would be extremely overpowered, what does that matter? You can balance future content around it, and old content is irrelevant because you can unsync it anyway, so I don't really see the problem. Indeed, I don't think it's so much of a balance issue as more of a gameplay engine limitation of physically having your characters somewhere different instead of just being an animation. But I digress, let's move on. Do you like explosions? Then Black Mage is for you. Primarily, the Black Mage is about juggling fire and ice magics. Fire will unleash absolutely tremendous damage, but eat through your MP rapidly, whilst ice will deal less damage, but rapidly regenerate your MP. The Black Mage's rotation is, in theory, no harder than any other job, but putting it into practice makes it one of the hardest in the game, because you'll need to have a good understanding of fight mechanics, when you have time to plant yourself in your magical circle that enhances your spells, when to use your triple cast to enable instant casting, whilst needing to move, for example. Black Mage is absolutely a job that can deal tremendous damage, coming in the top 3 for damage in almost every encounter. But keeping your Enochian meter going and optimizing your DPS is harder compared to other jobs. Black Mage is a great feeling job when it all comes together though, and it is unlocked at level 30 from the Thaumaturge class. Our first healer, Astrologian, is unlocked in Heavensward, so you'll need to be at least level 50 and have reached Ishgard in the story. It has no corresponding class and starts at level 30. Whilst white mages have strong regenerative magic, and scholars have strong barrier magic, Astrologians are a hybrid with 2 stances. One stance will imbue the Astrologian's magic with regen, the other with barriers. Only one stance can be active at a time. As such, an Astrologian fits well into any group. If you have a scholar, you can go regen stance. If you have a white mage, you can go barrier stance. When it comes to DPS, all 3 healers are extremely close. Overall, Astrologian just has the edge on white mage in terms of damage, however. and the unique thing about Astrologian would be your tarot cards. These were simplified as of Shadowbringers, and now when you draw a card, you'll either use it on a melee or a ranged DPS to buff them. Once you have 3 of the corresponding sigils, you can buff the entire raid. It is managing this whilst also maintaining your damage and making sure everyone is alive that puts the Astrologian slightly higher in the difficulty ratings, but is still a very simple class to play. A rewarding and flexible healer, but very middle of the road and not too exciting in many cases. Samurai is my current main job, in that I prioritise it when gearing up, and it's in a really good spot right now too. Had you asked me before Shadowbringers launched, my opinion would have been different, but things have only improved for the Samurai lately. Indeed, if you were to ask me what melee DPS is the most fun to play, I would say Samurai or Ninja. Your main loop with the Samurai is building up 3 Sen. Your Iaijutsu action will change depending on how many Sen you currently have. 1 Sen and you'll do a long duration damage over time. 2 Sen and you'll perform a strong area of effect attack. 3 will unleash the iconic Midare Setsugeka. Samurai has few positionals for a melee class and absolutely no utility. You'll be doing damage and that's it. On that topic, Samurai occupies the number 1 spot for melee currently, and when you average it out across all encounters, Samurai is usually the number 1 or number 2 damage dealer in general. I feel like the Samurai's kit is well designed, well implemented, not too hard to pull off either. Samurai is in a great spot, and I can't think of much that I would change for Samurai, personally. To unlock the job, you must be at least level 50 and have bought Stormblood. The Warrior ascends from the Marauder at level 30, and is what you might consider the Barbarian archetype. Although I'd personally consider it the most boring tank, and it was the last one I leveled up, in times past, warriors might have insisted that their 35k Fellcleaves made them a DPS tank. But these days, they are just a tank, and in most cases they aren't even the highest damage tank. In fact, in most situations they have the second lowest DPS, putting them roughly in the middle for tanks, only losing out to the Dark Knight. Warrior's role as a tank is building a meter that allows you to perform stronger attacks. You also have a raid-wide barrier that can be empowered by consuming buffs active at the same time. The noteworthy strengths of the Warrior are, in my opinion, the fact that it has the best invulnerability in the game in the form of Holmgang, and that is largely because it has the lowest cooldown that makes it the best. It also has a very strong and unique mitigation in the form of Vengeance for AoE pools. It would make Warrior my tank of choice for dungeons with large AoE pools these days. It used to be Dark Knight before the unfortunate changes. But for the most part, I find Warrior extremely underwhelming, and the class has been changed so much that it feels like a shell of its former self, lacking any real cohesion between its remaining abilities. It needs a slight rework in my opinion. It also has very bland and boring job quests. Another classless job, the Red Mage starts at level 50 and you must needs have bought Stormblood to start playing it. Much the same as the Samurai in that aspect. Whilst the Black Mage utilises destructive black magic and the White Mage heals with white magic, the Red Mage balances the two, using their internal magics as a source of power. Playing the Red Mage will see you alternating between black mana generating spells and white mana generating spells to fill up your meter. Once full, you can unleash a powerful melee combo which will spend this meter. Red Mages have the double cast feature too, which essentially means that after you cast almost any spell, your next spell will be instant. This can even be used with Verres to swiftly bring back downed players from death, although doing this often will rapidly deplete your MP. This might be the reason Red Mage is such a popular class. I don't know the official statistics, but I will tell you that I see more Red Mages than any other job. In terms of damage, however, Red Mage currently sits around 6 of 10, putting them just in the lower half of damage, but this is counteracted by their relative ease and very strong raising potential. In my opinion, they have the most satisfying AoE rotation of all the casters, making them my dungeon caster of choice. In terms of design, I feel they're a very well made job. There's nothing that stands out as poorly implemented or confusing. The reason I give them 4 out of 5 instead of 5 out of 5 is because despite classically being a hybrid and support class, in 14 you are largely just a DPSer as a red mage, who can also revive people, which I feel slightly misses the point of the job fantasy, in order to fit the strict roles as defined in 14 between damage, healer, and tank. Upon reaching level 30 with the Pugilist, you can join the Brotherhood of Monks, fighters who primarily punch and kick, pummeling foes into oblivion and unleashing their chakras. This is, I'll admit, not a class I'm fond of. It is heavily based on positionals, but fortunately you do have many tools to help you with this, such as True North and Riddle of Earth. Much like the Dragoon, the Monk is very reliant on keeping a meter active, in this case, Greased Lightning. Unlike the Dragoon, the Monk has more tools to keep this meter active during downtime. The Monk's unique thing would be that it has forms or stances. Think of it this way, whilst every other job is unable to mix up their single target 1-2-3 combo and their AoE 1-2-3 combo, the Monk is able to. Let's say you do a 1 of your AoE combo on any job, you can't then do a 2 of your single target combo. But with Monk, you can interweave these 2 different combos as they are bound to your stances. Hopefully I explained that well. It's a unique and interesting mechanic in some ways, but it's not the most useful thing in the world. In fact, Monk's DPS is very middle of the road. They average in around spot number 5 in damage. I feel like the Monk is another job that needs a slight rework to make them feel more like how an unarmed fighter should feel, to distinguish them and make them feel properly unique. Whilst they have some great animations, I just don't feel like the flow of combat is right for the Monk, compared to the Samurai and the Black Mage, who feel like they have a very good rhythm going. Monk needs a bit of work there, in my opinion. And it doesn't help that some of your abilities seem to be either useless or extremely situational, like Tornado Kick. And here we have the Sword and Board tank, the first I played, Paladin. Upon reaching level 30 as a gladiator, you can join the Royal Knights of Uldar and become the Paladin. Using holy spells, the Paladin is perhaps the most classic tank, as it's the only one that has a shield. In most instances, the Paladin is the second highest damaging tank, and also has 2 strong raid-wide buffs. An extremely strong single target heal, the only tank who can boast that, and an interesting playstyle wherein effectively you swap between melee attacks and magical attacks during burst periods. My only real issue with Paladin these days is the fact that their capstone ability at level 80, Atonement, looks ridiculous, like 2 unrelated animations stitched together, and I really wish they had a different animation. It might be petty, but that's the only reason I'm not playing Paladin much these days. Aside from that, Paladin is a great tank. Their invulnerability straight up makes them invincible, with no downsides whatsoever like any of the other tanks. This is countered by it having the longest cooldown. The Ninja is the evolution of the Rogue. You started off as a pirate, now you're a ninja. Incidentally, the Rogue is a unique class in that you can only start it once you have reached level 10 in any other class. And then at level 30 you can become a ninja. But how's the job doing these days? Well, whilst they lost their enmity related abilities, Ninja has embraced the role of being a unique melee DPS that uses mudras. In essence, you will combine hand symbols to get different results, depending on which you use. Not long ago, these mudras were reworked to fit better into rotations and clip less with other abilities. Even so, they can be a little challenging compared to some other jobs to pull off, because you do have to pull off a certain combo and you have to remember the combinations to get the certain mudras, but it's really not a big deal. It averages out at number 4 in damage, but ninjas do have a trick up their sleeve in the invaluable trick attack ability, which means the target receives more damage from every party member. Most of the challenge with Ninja will be making sure you have trick attack ready to go every time it's up. The job is in a great spot right now. It does have a meter, but it's quite easy to keep the meter going, and I don't think even having your meter drop, if that does happen, is going to annihilate your DPS like it might with Monk or Dragoon. In general, I can really recommend the Ninja right now, and I think it's perhaps one of the strongest for PvP as well. but that's just my very amateur opinion because I do hardly any PvP in this game. The classic healer, Conjurers will turn into the White Mage at level 30, utilising powerful heals and white magic such as Holy. As with most healers, White Mage has two primary offensive spells, one that damages over time and one that you'll be casting continuously whenever you're not healing. In the case of the White Mage, these are Glare and Deer. At lower levels they'll be Stone and Arrow. You also have the extremely powerful Benediction, which instantly heals the target to 100% health. White Mage is the only healer to have a 100% heal like that. In combat you will steadily accumulate a meter. Spending this meter will eventually enable your strongest attack too. You have a good amount of regen and instant heals to work with, meaning it'll be a simple enough job to keep your team alive. White Mage probably has the most exciting abilities of all the healers, such as the much enjoyed Blood Lily Misery spell, for when you want to get some big damage numbers. Speaking of, White Mage is generally second when it comes to overall raid DPS, but the difference between Astrologian and Scholar with White Mage in the middle is very, very small. It is perhaps the most well-rounded healer, and you can never go wrong with one in your group. If I had to suggest a healer to someone, I would probably say the White Mage. So why don't I have a White Mage at max level? Well, honestly, I just think the animations look ridiculous on my character. The last of the healers we'll be covering, Scholar, comes from the Arcanist at level 30, levels up in tandem with the Summoner. If you unlock Summoner and Scholar, they will both level up at the same time, so you get a free DPS or a free healer depending on how you look at it. Scholar is a very easy healer. In fact, up to level 50 you probably won't even need to heal in some dungeons, as your fairy healer will probably be enough. At higher levels, your barrier heals will become more important. Excogitation, which I probably pronounced wrong, is perhaps a great ability to demonstrate. To me, it is the Scholar ability. When you cast it on a party member, it will give them a buff that automatically heals them when they reach 50% health and consumes the buff. I call Scholar the preventative healer. Scholar's DPS is the worst of the three healers, generally speaking, although the gap between top and bottom is, as mentioned, very small. One problem with Scholar is that there are so few buttons to press and so few cool abilities that you might find your attention in danger of slipping. It's the slowest job in the game and rather bland. It's still an effective healer, it's just kinda boring. The other side of Arcanist. Summoner is a job that has been reworked several times, the most recent one having made them one of the most powerful damage jobs in the game. That said, while Summoner does currently average number 1 or number 2 spot, I'm not sure how long that's like to last, as it feels a tad overtuned. But I could be wrong. Summoner, as the name implies, fights alongside various magical constructs, but to me, doesn't feel like that much of a pet class, not much of a, well, Final Fantasy Summoner. To me, it feels more like a weak caster who sometimes has little fairies. The only real aspects of the job that feel satisfying to me would be when you get Demi Bahamut and Demi Phoenix, which are like very late abilities. Indeed, prior to getting Demi Bahamut, it feels like you're playing a completely different class, a different job. Most other summoner abilities feel very unimpactful, even if you are doing very good damage. Much of Summoner takes the archetype of damage over time, so you will have more mobility than, say, the Black Mage. Once again, I feel like this job needs a huge rework to make it properly embody the spirit of summoning. The Shadowbringers rework was a good start, but I think there's still a lot to go, making the Ifrits and Garudas and Titans actually feel like their larger counterparts would help a lot. Maybe get rid of the fairies and just make it more like having an attack that has an actual Ifrit come out, much like how the Demi Bahamuts work. The shared start with Arcanist has always hurt both Scholar and Summoner in that aspect, so perhaps it is time to fix that in the future. With the launch of Heaven's Ward came the Machinist. You must needs reach Ishgard in the main story to unlock it. This job underwent a complete overhaul with the launch of Shadowbringers, and in my opinion it turned the job from a complex, incoherent mess into a well-designed and extremely fun Machinist. Whilst before it was more like a gunner, it is now closer to what you might imagine a machinist is, in regards to the job fantasy. You'll be using your main gun of course, but also pulling out a bioblaster, a flamethrower, a giant automatic crossbow, and using various other technological marvels. The rotation is very simple, and the only reason I haven't given it a 1 out of 5 is because getting your heat blast, Gauss round, ricochet dumping off is probably going to give you early onset arthritis. The AoE rotation for Machinist is another notable one in that it's extremely fun to use the bioblaster and auto crossbow. Unfortunately, this ease comes with a drawback. Machinist DPS is rather lacking, averaging in at the 3rd worst of the DPS roles. That said, there are some encounters wherein Machinist shines and comes up into the top 5. But do keep in mind, again, that the gap between the best DPS and the worst DPS is quite insignificant in almost every situation. You shouldn't let a job's lower DPS ranking be your sole deciding factor on what job to play. If you are performing your rotation properly, that's the important part. The main thing to consider is the job fun? And yes, Machinist is very fun and satisfies the job fantasy of being a machinist and having giant weird guns that shoot out poison and fire, or giant chains, why not? Oh, and of course, you have your own mech. The Dancer is the nearest thing 14 has to a support class. Like Gunbreaker, it starts at level 60 and you'll need Shadowbringers to unlock it. They are almost always in the bottom 3 when it comes to damage. The Dancer brings some interesting utility to a raid, which is their strongest point, and also unfortunate for Bard because Bard used to be support utility DPS, and they got somewhat reduced in efficiency to make the Dancer shine. You will combine various dances to buff yourself and party members, as well as choosing a party member to be your dance partner, a symbiotic buff that enhances both partners. Dancer is a simple class, quite an easy one. If you want to try out damage dealing, it might be one of the best to give a shot, as the learning curve is small, and even if your damage isn't great, you can provide support to the party, no matter what way you look at it. Plus, as a physical range DPS, you have no real cast times and a lot of mobility, meaning you're usually free to avoid incoming AoEs. Whilst in most cases, Dark Knight is the lowest damage dealing tank, you can counter that with 3 very compelling arguments. First up, the Dark Knight has the single best damage mitigation ability in the game, bar none, in the form of the Blackest Night. Second of all, Dark Knight is currently extremely easy to play. Finally, Dark Knight has the best job questline in the game, and it's worth doing for that alone. The job unlocks at level 50, and you need to have brought Heavensward and also have reached Heavensward in the storyline, much like Machinist and Astrologian, as the quest unlocks in the city of Ishgard. The Dark Knight itself starts at level 30, and with their greatswords, the Dark Knight once fulfilled the role of anti-magic tank, but these days your rotation largely consists of keeping your dark side meter active and juggling your MP. I would absolutely consider this the easiest tank and a great beginner choice for someone looking to get into tanking. Unfortunately, in being stripped down, it has lost some of its class identity. Hopefully you can get some of this back in the future. Blue Mage is the game's first limited job, in that you can't use it really in standard gameplay, so to speak. It has a lower level cap, and you can't bring it along to a lot of the game's content, rendering it, well, kind of pointless, a bit useless, more of a minigame or side activity. It has its own questline and arena system that you can do every week, and much like Blue Mage's work in classic Final Fantasy titles, your goal is to absorb actions from certain enemies and use them as you see fit. So the job doesn't really have a normal rotation. It's more about learning spells and knowing when to use them in what instances. I'm only including it in this video to briefly explain these aspects. Think of it as a side activity you can do, but you can't really use it as a main combat job. And that about does it. Once again, if you were looking for a more in-depth guide, please do check out my tank guide. And if you'd like to see something similar to that, for healers and damage dealers, do let me know and I'll start working on that. For now, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Ciao.